Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with part 1 of my November wrap-up. As always, content warnings and videos and people mentioned will be listed in the description box, and I'm actually going to start with something that I finished, I think at the very end of October, but I didn't log it. I do a really bad job of logging some of the plays that I read, and I want to be better about that. So this one is Silent Sky by Lauren Gunderson. I have reviewed several of her plays before, and I'm realizing that she is a big hit or big miss playwright for me. Like I either love her work or I really don't like it or don't connect to it, and sadly this was one of the disappointing ones. I did read one later in the month that I loved though. So this is a play based on, let me check her name, Henrietta Leavitt, who works at the Harvard Observatory in the early 1900s. She and several other women are working there, and they're not allowed to use the telescopes, of course, but they do really important work with like charting the stars. Henrietta Leavitt actually discovered discovered the technique that they could use to measure distances in space, and she did a lot of other things as well. She's a really interesting person, and this is all based on a true story. And yeah, I'm really sad that I didn't like this. I did enjoy some things about it. I think Lauren Gunderson's dialogue is always really great. I love the concept. I always love the way that she chooses to focus on these really interesting historical women. So I always love the premise of her plays. And I also really loved the female friendship and the female solidarity, like seeing these women in STEM, because Henrietta goes to work with a group of several other women who are already at Harvard. So I loved all of that. But I had some pretty significant problems with this one. One thing that I really didn't like is just several things about this play were left very unsatisfying, so that already bothered me. But the thing that especially bothered me is the changes that were made from the real story, because I looked up Henrietta Leavitt after reading this play, and yeah, I guess if you want to enjoy the play more, maybe don't do that, except I always like learning more about the true story after I read stuff like this. So anyway, there were 3 big changes that I really didn't like. One of them is there's a woman named Annie Jump Cannon, who is one of the women who works, who already works here, and then Henrietta shows up and joins this group of women. And Henrietta Leavitt was deaf, and Annie Jump Cannon was as well. But in this play, Cannon is not, and I just don't understand why you would do that. Like, I think it's weird to change that aspect of somebody's identity anyway, but even from a storytelling perspective, it's like, why would you make that change? Like, you're already telling this story about this really talented, incredible woman who is also deaf, and like, why wouldn't you keep the fact that one of the women she makes friends with is also deaf? That could have been a really great character dynamic, and again, like I said, it just seems weird to change that part of somebody's identity. And then also something else, this play manufactures a conflict between Henrietta and her sister by making, like, it sets up like that false dichotomy between science and religion, because Henrietta's sister is very religious and very devout, and Henrietta is not. And the thing that bugs me about that is because Henrietta Leavitt in real life was a very devout person throughout her life, and I feel like she's a great example of how religion and science are not mutually exclusive, and I feel like by changing these things for a modern audience, we, like, that kind of perpetuates this false dichotomy. Like, I don't know if the playwright thought it was too unbelievable, so she had to change it for a modern audience, but that just personally really irritated me. And then finally, the last thing is there was a really unnecessary romantic subplot in this play that, as far as I can tell, had nothing to do with anything that happened in Henrietta Leavitt's life. And, like, I'm all for a well-done romantic subplot, but I don't like when things are added to a historical piece that is based on a real thing, and like you make up conflict just to leave things more depressing or more unsatisfying than they were in real life. I don't like that choice. So I sadly really didn't like this. I gave Silent Sky 2.5 stars. Definitely not my favorite of her work. But I love other things by her. So the first book that I actually finished in November was The Theft of Sunlight by Intisar Khanani. This is the sequel, kind of a sequel. It's a companion sequel to Thorn by Intisar Khanani. So there's Thorn, and then this is the first book in a like spin-off companion series. I definitely think you would enjoy this book more if you have read Thorn. Like, I think you would pick up on more things, but you could, I think, go into this one and not be too confused if that was what you wanted. And we are following a different main character. So we're following Ray, and she lives in this small town in this kingdom where there are these people who have been taking children, like kidnapping them, possibly human trafficking them, and they're called snatchers. That's what everyone refers to them as. And this has been plaguing their kingdom for several years at this point. And at the beginning of the book, somebody in Ray's town is snatched, and she has connections at the palace, and she ends up going to visit some family members. She really doesn't want to go because Ray does not think she would fit in well at the palace, but she decides to do it because she wants to try and see what the palace is doing about investigating these snatchers, because it feels like they're not doing anything, and she really wants to get this young girl back. So she gets to the palace, and she ends up kind of getting convinced to join the like ladies in waiting of a character that we know from the first book. So Ray is in this very different situation. Like, there's a lot of politics and a lot of backstabbing, and she doesn't feel at home here, but she ends up agreeing to be part of this because she thinks she can do a lot of good here. And as the story goes on, she ends up meeting this street lord named Bren, and the two of them kind of are working together to try and basically force people to do something about the snatchers and to try and figure out what is going on, who they are, what is happening, because these kids usually don't come back, but if they do, they're never the same. There seems to be some kind of like magic at work in addition to just the trauma of what happened to them. And I loved this book so much. I did really enjoy Thorn. I know that one doesn't work for everybody, but I did really like it. I loved The Theft of Sunlight even more. I loved Ray as a main character. I think she is so fierce and compassionate, and she also, something that's really interesting is she has a club foot, and because of the horrible way that some people treat her because of this, this book does definitely deal with ableism. She has kind of grown up distrusting really beautiful people, I think for understandable reasons, but it's really interesting to see her character grow throughout the book because she kind of has to learn the difference between trusting your instincts and trusting your preconceptions about people. And I think that was done really well. Like, you definitely understand why Ray feels this way, but you still get to see her like grow and change. And I just loved her as a character. I also really loved the writing. I think Intisar Kanani has the perfect amount of detail in her writing. I really loved Bran too as a character, and he's so interesting because I feel like in fantasy, a lot of times these like thief lord characters, there's like two kinds. There's either the like Robin Hood, you know, he's doing everything for a good reason even if he's breaking the rules, or there's like the selfish thief who's only out for himself, and like maybe there is character development later on, but there's kind of like the good thief or the bad thief, and Bren doesn't really fit into that, and Ray kind of doesn't know what to do about it. And as the reader, I kind of had a similar reaction, which I loved. He's such a well-written and complex character because he does do a lot of good things, and he does have good reasons for some of the less good things he does, but he's definitely not a Robin Hood character. So he was really interesting. I loved his and Ray's dynamic. I thought the politics of this book was really, really interesting, and seeing Ray like figure out these different alliances and factions between people. I think there's definitely enough other stuff that if you're not into political fantasy, you could still enjoy the plot of this one. But I personally did enjoy the politics, and I also really loved the supporting cast of characters. We get to see Alira and Kestrin again, and I really liked them. I also really loved Ray's, I think it's her cousin and her cousin's husband, I think, who she goes to stay with. I really, really loved them and their relationship together and their relationship with Ray. Yeah, I loved this book. I'm really, really excited for the sequel to this one, and I gave The Theft of Sunlight 4.5 stars, but the longer I think about it, the more I'm like, maybe this was 5 stars, because I really loved this. Next, I finished Fire with Fire by Destiny Soria. This is a standalone fantasy that I believe I mistakenly called Latinx inspired at one point, and the author is Latinx, but the fantasy itself isn't necessarily, so I apologize for that confusion. And this is a book about dragons, and it's also supposed to be a very like sister-focused book. We're following 2 character perspectives, Eden, who is the older sister, and Dany, who is the younger, and their family is a family of dragon hunters, or dragon slayers. Their family has fought dragons for generations. Dragons are really dangerous in this world. They're not, like they're considered like monsters to be eradicated, basically. And Eden has always been really dedicated to becoming a dragon hunter, and Dany is less so. She wants to have more of a normal life, and something else that makes it complicated is Dany, she has a lot of like natural talent, and Eden is a really, really hard worker. So it's really frustrating for Eden to see Dany be so naturally good at things that do not come easily for her, and also and the fact that Dany doesn't care about them where Eden does. And there's also this group of people in this world called sorcerers, where like they're definitely very mysterious, and the characters like Eden and Danny's family aren't always sure that they can trust them, but they kind of have to work together. And this was a really interesting book. I will link my currently reading update where I talked about my kind of like first impressions of this book, because I was only a couple chapters in. And sadly, like, I really liked those first few chapters, and then things kind of went downhill for me. Like, I did overall like things about the book, but there was a pretty significant aspect that disappointed me. I did enjoy the writing though. I thought the side characters were really well developed. Like, I loved the friendships here, especially like Danny's friendships. I just thought those were really well done. I really enjoyed those characters. I thought Kieran was very interesting. There's a like previous friend that Danny kind of has to reconcile with. I didn't like her at first, but she ended up winning me over by the end. So I think some of the character work, especially with like the side characters, was great. Danny kind of frustrated me a little bit at the beginning of the book, but she did grow on me by the end, which I appreciated. And I also thought the dragons were really interesting characters, and I thought that was a really interesting element of the book. But my big issue with the book is I don't feel like this is really a book about sisters. At least only in a very superficial plot way, because like, this is not a story about Eden and Danny. This is a story about Danny, and Eden is kind of a way to tell Danny's story. And I think that maybe wouldn't have bothered me as much if I hadn't enjoyed Eden as a character so much. Like, I talk about in that video how I really identify with Eden in some ways. So I think there definitely is like a personal aspect to why I'm so disappointed that Eden was very unimportant as in her own right in this book. Like, plot-wise, she mattered. But this book really didn't feel like it was equally about Eden and Danny, which I think is extra disappointing considering how Eden feels that people always overlook her in favor of Danny. And it kind of bugs me that it feels like the author did that too. Like, Eden was just like a function of Danny's story, and I really hated that. I understand why the choices she made in the book would like shift the focus. I didn't like some of the choices she made, not that you're supposed to, but like, I understand why that would set up the story differently. But I just wish that we had gotten more of Eden like making her own choices and having her own character arc rather than serving Danny's character arc. Like, I really didn't like that. It didn't seem to go with like what I was expecting, like this book about sisters, and the fact that we have two perspectives, but really only one of them matters. Or really only one of them is treated as an actual character arc. So yeah, that aspect was really disappointing for me. I also had slightly mixed feelings about the ending. Some parts I really liked, some parts I was a little iffy on. I did like some things about this book. It's one I wouldn't hesitate to recommend to people, but those couple aspects did drag it down for me. And I gave Fire with Fire 3.5 stars. Next, I finally read Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas, and I have to show off the gorgeous hardcover under the dust jacket. I think that is so pretty. I've been meaning to read this book since it came out, pretty much. And I didn't read it completely on time, but I did read it at the beginning of November, around the time of Day of the Dead, so that was my goal, is to at least read it like soonish after it was set. And yeah, I feel like a lot of people have read this one and know what it's about, but we're following our main character Yadriel, who's a brujo, and he is also trans, and he's trying to prove to his community of brujex that he is a boy and that he is a brujo, and that this is what he is meant to do, that he can do this, but they won't let him do like the ceremony that will kind of like prove that, or that will like officially give him his powers, because they don't think it'll work. He does have some people in the community and in his family who are supportive of him and his identity, but like not everybody is, and they don't want to give him the opportunity to prove to them who he is. So Yadriel decides that he's just going to do the ceremony himself, and he does it, and it seems to work. He accidentally brings back the ghost of Julian, who's kind of his school's bad boy, instead of Yadriel's cousin, because he's trying to bring back his cousin's ghost so that he can help him and prove to his family that he can do everything that a brujo is supposed to do. But he brings back Julian instead, and so then the rest of the book is Yadriel and Julian trying to figure out what happened to him, why he died, and they also start discovering some other things, like some missing kids in the city and how that might be connected. And of course also there's the ticking clock of Julian's not going to be able to stay around forever, and even though the two of them don't hit it off at the beginning, they start developing feelings for each other, and that obviously complicates everything as well. And I really enjoyed this. I really liked our main characters. I really liked Yadriel, and I also really liked Julian, and I think he was such an interesting character because he definitely has like an anger problem, but I think the way that's shown, like I feel like that was dealt with very thoughtfully and very compassionately. I really loved the romance between them. I love a good ghost boyfriend trope, and I feel like their romance was developed really well. I really loved seeing their connection, and like the two of them are so different, and it was really enjoyable seeing them like kind of butt heads, but then also grow to really understand each other. Julian is a really interesting mix of like hot-headed and also just like so like happy and bouncy in a way. I just really enjoyed him as a character, and he surprised me quite a bit too. I also really liked all of the aspects of the Brujex culture that we got here, like the way that Yadriel's community and family like use their magic and everything. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this. I did end up giving this 4.5 stars. There were a couple of things where I kind of saw where some things were going. I see why some of those things happen for plot reasons, but I think for character reasons they were more disappointing for me, if that makes sense. But I did still really enjoy this. I'm excited to read more from Aiden Thomas, and I gave Cemetery Boys 4.5 stars, like I said. Next, I finished Code Talker by Joseph Rushak. The subtitle is a novel about the Navajo Marines of World War II, and that's what this is. So if you weren't aware, which I wouldn't be surprised because this still doesn't get enough attention, but during World War II, the United States had a group of Navajo Code Talkers. So these were Navajo Marines who created their own code that the US like Navy and military and everything used during the war, specifically in the Pacific Theater. And it was kind of a double code because not only were they speaking in Navajo, which is an incredibly complex language, and it's one of those languages where if you don't grow up speaking it, you probably won't be able to learn it. So it's a very complex language, which made it really good for code. But also they would come up with certain code words for things that the Navajo language did not have a word for already. So there were those kind of two layers of code. And yeah, it's very interesting because the United States government was like, you know, forcing Native kids into residential schools, stripping them of their culture and their language and doing horrible things to them, just abusing them terribly. And then once World War II started, they were like, oh, hey, actually, could you use your native language to help us out? That'd be great, thanks. And the fact that so many Navajo people did, and that they served like this country that was doing these horrible things to them, is pretty amazing. But yeah, so this book is a fictional account, but it is based on the true story of one of these code talkers. His name is Ned. His name is Ned Begay, or that's the name that he uses for most of the book. And this is a fairly short novel. It follows a little bit of his childhood and growing up, a little bit of his time at a residential school, and then we also see him join the military and become one of the code talkers, and we kind of see a little bit about how that worked. Then we actually see them like on missions and everything in the Pacific. And I thought this was really well done. I've been meaning to read Joseph Rushak for a while, and I thought this was really excellent. Joseph Rushak is a native author. I don't think he is Navajo. I believe he is Abenaki. But yeah, he is a native author, and this was like such an interesting book. I really liked the parts that focused on the code and how the code worked. I just found that really interesting. I knew a little bit about it from when I was a kid and I was reading about it, but obviously I didn't know a ton about it. And this is something in history where even when it was declassified a few decades ago, it's still not talked about very much. And it's like, one thing that was really interesting with this book is I knew that the Navajo code talkers were very important in the war. I did not realize that they like literally made everything possible. Like everything that the US Army did was possible because of them, because everything went through their code. Their code was unbreakable, and they used it for like everything, for all kinds of communication and all kinds of like maneuvers and everything. So it wasn't just like, oh, there were some big significant battles that the Navajo code talkers helped win. It was like everything went through them, which is just incredible. I also really like the aspects we get that talk about Navajo culture. I also think this book does a good job of touching on some really serious issues with a very light hand. I don't know what the age audience recommendation for this book is, but I feel like this might be one you could give to like middle school, maybe even upper elementary. Like it might be a good book to kind of open some of these conversations about residential schools, for example, and about World War II, about anti-Native racism and other things like that. Like I said, I was surprised that the residential school aspect was not as horribly graphic as we know it was. I imagine that's probably because the author wanted this book to be more accessible to younger readers. I don't know. But yeah, I thought this was really interesting, really well done. It's a very quick and engaging read. Like it's very fast, and the chapters are very short. I do think there were some of the like detailed battle maneuvers that I could have done with a little less focus on, but I see why they were in here. And I gave Code Talker 4 stars. I do think that the characterization was not as big of a focus, and the writing is definitely very straightforward, but I think that worked for the story that was being told here, because the setup of the story is that Ned Begay is like telling this story to his grandchildren, and it's like, yeah, you wouldn't like stop and characterize yourself as you're doing this. Next, I finished The Defiant Middle by Kaya Oakes, How Women Claim Life's In-Betweens to Remake the World. I received an arc of this book in exchange for a free and honest review, and I actually have that review up. I will link that down below. Kaya Oakes is a Catholic feminist writer who I've talked about before. I really enjoy her work. I really like her writing, and I was really excited about this book. And again, check out that review if you want more thoughts, but just kind of a general overview. This book is about Kaya Oakes takes different women from history. A lot of them are religious figures, but not all of them are. She uses other like kind of side examples that are not all religious women, and she talks about how the restrictions and the expectations that society places on women, like there's no way to win. Like women are supposed to be young but not too young, old but not too old, passionate but not crazy, like intelligent but not bossy, like all of these contradictions, and it's impossible. And she also talks about how like throughout history women have kind of had to live in this in-between space, like they're caught between these expectations and the complicated reality of who they are and how complicated people are. So she talks about that. She talks about the way that society forces these expectations on women, and she also talks about the incredible things that women have accomplished in these like marginal spaces. Like she doesn't let society off the hook for pushing them there, and this isn't like a there is some hope in this book, but it's not like a women can do anything, so it's fine that they're treated terribly. Like that's not the message of this book. But yeah, I thought this was really, really well done. I love Kaya Oakes' writing. She's very engaging and very approachable. I liked the like the chapter focuses. Like in my review, I talk about a few specific chapters that especially stood out to me. But for each chapter, she takes like a personality trait that women are not supposed to be or have, and she talks about women who like embody that. I just think the way that she supported like her premise and her argument really worked for me. I think the historical aspects were really interesting. Like I said, I usually liked the examples she chose. This book is also intersectional. She's explicitly inclusive of trans women. She does talk about intersectionality as it pertains to race. I would have liked to see maybe a little more specifics about that, about how these expectations are different if you are a woman of color versus a white woman, but I do like that she talks about that throughout the book, and I really liked some of the like supporting, I don't know, like supporting arguments almost, or details, like in the chapter that deals most extensively with mental health. She talks about the way that we romanticize women's mental distress and mental illness, and I like the part about Sylvia Plath, I think was brilliant. Like it really, like it's something that I have noticed too. There's like a quote, obviously subject to change because this is an arc. So content warning, because this quotation does talk very specifically about the way that Sylvia Plath died. So I will put a timestamp if you want to skip this part. If anyone ever brought up Sylvia Plath in a classroom again, I would probably explode. It was the 90s. We had played in the fields of feminism for decades. Riot girls were stomping around in boots and bras with no shirts worn over them, and yet my classmates still invoked Plath with a regularity that made me queasy. The problem wasn't Plath herself or her writing. It was the way we were taught to talk about her, which always centered on her depression and the fact that she died by suicide. We weren't talking about her husband Ted Hughes' infidelities, or the letters to her psychologist that would turn up years later, revealing Hughes had beaten Plath while she was pregnant, causing a miscarriage, and told her he wished she were dead. We were instead talked about how she gassed herself with her children in the room next door, leaving them milk and bread to eat beforehand. We knew these details acutely. We talked about Plath as a victim of her own mind. Our conversations about her in classes were exhausting, demoralizing, and dangerously contagious. Then she also talks about Virginia Woolf and all these other examples, and like that was a part that really, I think, stood out to me. So that's just one example, I think, of the really good job that Kaya Oakes does. So I just wanted to give kind of an example of the analysis that she does. I think that was very insightful. Obviously some parts of this book are hard to read at times, but overall I thought it was really excellently done. I did sometimes feel like I couldn't quite see how she was making the distinction between like mysticism and like the mental state of the people she was talking about. And then also some of the examples she chose or how she interpreted them were maybe not my favorites. Like there were a few in particular where it's like, I understand why she would want to include some of these like really out there like women, like saints or historical figures, but also by choosing the ones that would feel like weirdest to a modern audience, I feel like, I don't know, there were some places where I'm like, I hope people don't read this and think like that's what all Catholics do, or that that's like indicative of like the denomination as a whole. But altogether I did really enjoy this, and I gave The Defiant Middle 4.5 stars. Next I finished Goldheart by Kenley Davidson. This is the second book I think it's like officially listed as the second book in the Andari Chronicles, but it's the third one I read because I also read a prequel novella. And this is a series of companion novels that are all like romantic fantasies that are based on different fairy tales. This is a shorter one. It's a novella, and it's a retelling of Rumpelstiltskin. We follow our main character Elaine, who we have actually heard of in the first book in the series. And she ends up, like, she's a painter, and she ends up being tasked with an impossible painting job from this man who, like, basically locks her up and keeps her in his house until she does what he says. And like the painting that he wants from her is impossible. Like, there's really no way for her to do it. So she's obviously really scared about this. He's keeping her here until she can do it. And then our male lead is named Will, and he has a connection to this family. This man who's like locking up Elaine, he has a son named Blaze, and Blaze and Will are really good friends. Blaze is not party to the horrible things his father does. And we know that Will has some kind of connection with this family or with what's going on, but we don't know all of that at the beginning. And I liked this. I didn't love this. I think this is in the middle for me as far as the 3 books I've read from this series. My favorite is still the novella, or the short story, I mean. I do still like the writing, and I really like the way that Kenley Davidson uses the aspects of the retelling, or like from the source material, like the way she interprets those in her retellings, I think are really interesting. I also really loved Blaze. Like, I think he was such an interesting character, and I really hope that he gets like his own spin-off at some point, which might happen. I don't know. And I also liked the use of painting. I really liked seeing how that gave Elaine strength and courage, because she's a very quiet and I don't know, kind of retiring person at the beginning, and seeing the way that that gave her courage, I just really enjoyed that. I was disappointed in the romance though. Initially I liked Elaine and Will's interactions. I thought they were cute. I was like excited to see where it went, but I feel like the point where they went from that to being in love with each other happened very quickly, which was especially weird because The Countess and the Frog, which is the one, my favorite in the series so far, had a much shorter page time, and I feel like it was better developed than this one was. And then also, because I am me, and I almost always like side characters more, I liked Blaze a lot better than Will. I think he was a lot more interesting. I thought he would have been a much more compelling love interest, and it wouldn't maybe have occurred to me, except that the book kind of sets him up as a like romantic false lead almost. So it's like, why did you disappoint me for no reason? Like, I think I would have been more content with Elaine and Will if, like, Blaze hadn't even been in the running. He had just been, like, a side character. But anyway, I gave Goldheart 3.75 stars. Next, I finished Steeped in Stories, Timeless Children's Novels to Refresh Our Tired Souls by Matali Perkins. So this is a nonfiction book that is about the value of, like, classic children's stories, and specifically for adults, reading those and returning to those, and the way that they can refresh our tired souls, as the title says, or the subtitle. I loved this, and I'm really glad, because this was one of my most anticipated releases for the year. I was hoping I would love it, and I absolutely did. So first off, I love the way that Matali Perkins writes. She's so thoughtful and warm, and I really love the way that she organizes this book, and the way, like, the examples that she uses, and the way that she, I guess I should say the way that she uses her examples, which are these 7 different children's stories, which she does tell you at the beginning of the book. Anne of Green Gables, Heidi, Emily of Deep Valley, The Hobbit, Little Women, A Little Princess, and The Silver Chair. And she does spoil those. So she says at the beginning, you know, if you want to not be spoiled, then you should read those first. And I had read all but one, which was Emily of Deep Valley, that I read last month, so that I could continue reading this. Anyway, that was a lot of setup. I loved this. The way this is structured is at the very beginning, Matali Perkins talks about, like, why she talks about a few things that really resonated with me. She talks about the importance of rereading, which I loved, the importance of children's literature, which I loved, specifically for adults, and how it is not just acceptable for adults to read kids' books, but it is necessary. And she also talks about the, like, engaging with material that has problematic aspects and that also has really good aspects. And that is a theme that she returns to throughout the book. In every chapter, she has a section where she addresses, like, the attitudes of these books that are not okay, and kind of the way that you can approach things that have good and bad in them, which, like, most things do, like most pieces of media specifically. So I really love that. And she's also very specific about some of the ways that you can do that. Like, one of the sections at the end, she returns to that idea, and she has kind of like a set of steps to kind of give you a place to start about, like, how to think about how to interact with these books that you might love but might have really messed up parts in them as well. And I really loved that. I loved all of the things she said at the beginning. So, like, right from the beginning, I was like, yes, we see eye to eye. I love this. And then I also really loved the way that she handled these different examples in children's books. The way she structures this is she chooses each children's book to represent a different one of the 7 heavenly virtues. So this book does have a religious perspective, if that is something you would want to know about beforehand. Even though I'm religious myself, I'm very particular about the religious books I read because I feel like a lot of times they come off feeling very trite or overly simplified, which is not the way that most people I know interact with their beliefs. It just doesn't feel very true to life, and I don't like reading it when it's like overly simplified like that. But this book did not do that at all. I really loved it. I loved the way that she incorporated those things. And I think one of the best examples of how much, well, there's 2 examples of like how much I love this book and how effective it was and how much of an impact it had on me. One is that I actually wrote down my answers to the discussion questions throughout the book, which I almost never do. I will think about discussion questions in nonfiction, but I never write my answers down. But here I actually did. And also she managed to convince me like to return to some of the books in here that she talks about that I had planned never to reread. She made me want to reread them. There were a few in here actually, like Anne of Green Gables, because I loved the first few books, but my disappointment with the later books in the series really soured my feelings on the series overall, so I haven't returned to those in a long time, but now I want to reread Anne of Green Gables. Also The Hobbit. I have always preferred Lord of the Rings more. I keep trying to like The Hobbit and I just can't, but now I kind of want to try again. And what was the other one? Oh, A Little Princess. I loved The Secret Garden. It's a really like formative book for me. It's one of my favorite books, although it also has issues. And so when I got to A Little Princess a couple years ago, I was really disappointed, but now I want to read it again. So I just think that also speaks to how good this book is. She could not argue me out of my Little Women opinions, but I don't hold that against her because I don't think anybody could. I hate every romance in that book without exception. And I also have other issues with it, but anyway, I loved this. There were like a couple of tiny things that I didn't love as much. Like in the Little Women section, she talks about like moderation and temperance, which I think is important, but there was a couple of specific things she said about like tempering kind of emotional responses that did not sit as well with me, possibly because I'm an extremely emotional person. And like, I think I get what she was getting at, but I just wish that maybe it had been said in a slightly different way. But those were like very small complaints. Again, I loved this. I gave Steeped in Stories 5 stars. And finally, the last book I'm going to talk about for this part of the wrap up is Who the F Are You? By Huda Fahmy. This is a graphic novel that is semi-autobiographical. We're following our main character / the author, whose name is Huda, and Huda and her family have just moved to Dearborn, Michigan, which is a small town that has a big Muslim population. And so Huda was used to, at her old school, she was the only girl who wore hijab, and now at her new school, there are tons of girls who wear hijab. And so now that's kind of been, like, part of her identity was that she was the hijabi girl, and so now she has to kind of, like define herself more by who she is rather than who she is in comparison to other people, and kind of that idea of like identity and how much of identity is like in relation to others versus yourself. And I really enjoyed this. It's very funny. I really liked the humor in this graphic novel. I liked the illustration style. It's like very expressive. I thought it was really fun. Just like this graphic novel in general was very warm and funny and thoughtful. I really liked following Huda. I think this story does a good job too of like, there are aspects of this that I think pretty much anybody will connect to, like the way that she deals with making friends and trying to figure out like what her thing is, you know? I think that's something that a lot of people will see themselves in, but this book also deals with her specific experiences as a Muslim girl. I also really loved her relationship with her mom, and just like the little glimpses we get of her mom's character I thought were really interesting, and just I really liked her. My only complaint with this is that I wish we would have gotten a lot more time about, like a lot more time spent on Huda's sisters, because I think she has, is it 5 sisters or 4 sisters? She's from a big family and her sisters are clearly an important part of her life, but we spend very little time on them, on like getting to know them at all, and I just wish that we had gotten more of that. Like I kind of thought from the way the graphic novel was starting that they were going to be a more important part of the story than they were, and I just wish we had gotten more development for them or just spent more time with them. But I did really enjoy this overall, and I gave Who the F Are You 4.5 stars, and I'm really excited to read more comics or graphic novels from Huda Fahmy. Okay everybody, so those were all of the books I read in the first part of November. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these, what you thought of them, or if you're going to pick them up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!